Cannabis Common Sense, the show that tells the truth about marijuana and the politics behind its prohibition.
Hello and welcome to another exciting edition of Cannabis Common Sense. We have another great show for you tonight. We have a guest back on from Norway, Roar Mikalsen, author of many books on individual freedom and the drug war, who is going to talk about an upcoming action he is doing in Oslo, Norway. We have a interesting hemp news segment with the latest news and more, so stay tuned as we bring on our infamous dancing cannabis leaves.
I feel the force.
Our first story tonight comes from the nation, the United States. And right here, Oregon has more cannabis consumers per capita than does any other state, according to data compiled by the online news outlet Best Life. The authors collected data on the percentage of adults in each state who acknowledged having used cannabis within the last year, as compiled by Statista.com. They then cross-referenced those percentages with the most recent population study from the U.S. Census Bureau to calculate the number of cannabis users per capita per 100,000 residents in each state. Predictably, most jurisdictions with the greatest number of adult consumers per capita were states where adult use cannabis is legal, but Oregon was number one. Number two was Colorado, 3 was Vermont, 4 was Maine. The fifth most cannabis consumption state is Alaska. 6 is right across the river from us here in Portland, Oregon, Washington State, and the 7th was Nevada. The states with the lowest number of adult use cannabis consumers per capita are at the 50th, the lowest spot, Utah. Number 49 is Texas, and number 48 is Mississippi. Nearby in the south there in North Carolina, medical cannabis is now legal at the Cherokee Nation's reservation, which abuts the Great Smoky Mountain National Park, as the state of North Carolina is reconsidering reforming medical cannabis now. The medical cannabis is now legal in a part of western North Carolina, but only on Cherokee land, according to a statement from the Eastern Band of Cherokee Indians. On August 5th, a local ordinance was approved by the Eastern Band of Cherokee Indians Tribal Council legalizing medical cannabis within the Qualla boundary. The new law will allow qualifying patients to purchase up to 1 ounce per day with a maximum purchase limit of 6 ounces per month. Qualifying patients who do not live within the Cherokee Eastern Band Nation next to the Great Smoky Mountain National Park are still eligible to receive a recommendation and eventually purchase medical marijuana at a forthcoming medical cannabis dispensary that will be located on tribal land. Eastern Band of the Cherokee's principal chief, Richard Sneed, said in a statement, quote, "The council's approval of a medical marijuana ordinance is a testament to the changing attitudes towards legal marijuana and a recognition of the growing body of evidence that supports cannabis as medicine, particularly for those with debilitating conditions like cancer and chronic pain," end quote. This move by the Cherokee comes as a broader legislation to legalize medical cannabis statewide in North Carolina is being considered by North Carolina's lawmakers. Senate Bill 711, the state's first bipartisan medical cannabis regulation bill, though there have been a number of Democratic-sponsored ones in many past legislative sessions, has been approved so far by the Senate Judiciary and Finance Committees. The bill still needs approval from 2 additional Senate committees before being brought for a floor vote in the Senate, and the bill will have to pass through the Senate and the House before the end of the session deadline on August 20th, this week. The proposal would allow qualifying patients with a physician's recommendation to access a 30-day supply of medical cannabis at a time via licensed retail outlets. If you live in North Carolina, send a message to your lawmakers in support of medical cannabis access and Senate Bill 711 now. I actually have been a marijuana activist for 40 years and started in North Carolina. I lived in North Carolina when I was a teenager, attended high school there, and did my first year in college in North Carolina before moving to the great Northwest of the United States. But back then, they almost made a quarter pound of marijuana decriminalized, but an ounce of marijuana has been decriminalized in North Carolina back then in the 70s. According to a new study, just under half of Americans ages 18 and older admit having tried cannabis, according to survey data compiled by the Gallup organization. 49% of respondents said they have consumed cannabis, up from 1 in 3 Americans 2 decades ago. 12% of respondents identify current consumer of marijuana. That percentage has remained stable over recent years. Younger respondents, those who identified as politically liberal, and those who were non-religious were most likely to have prior experience with cannabis. Men were more likely than women to identify as current marijuana consumers. Prior polling by Gallup reports that 70% of Americans now find smoking marijuana to be morally acceptable, and 68% say its use should be legal for adults. The Gallup poll is available online on their website. Out of Washington, D.C., retail marijuana sales in the United States are projected to reach $43 billion per year by 2025, according to an economic analysis by New Frontier Data. Legal marijuana sales have increased to historic levels in recent months, with sales totaling nearly $6 billion in the first quarter of this year. Retail sales are projected to increase in the coming months as additional states, such as New Jersey and New York, begin licensing cannabis retailers. The New Frontier Data Analysis estimates that by 2025, quote, 42% of the total annual U.S. cannabis demand will be met by legal purchases in a regulated marketplace, end quote. Of the $43 billion in projected annual sales in 2025, analysts estimate that roughly 62% of transactions will involve adult use purchases, while the remaining 38% will be medical cannabis sales. And in Jerusalem and Israel, members of the Israeli parliament, or Knesset, have narrowly defeated legislation that sought to depenalize activities involving the possession and cultivation of cannabis by adults. The proposal sought to eliminate criminal and civil penalties involving the possession of up to 50 grams of cannabis and home cultivation for personal use quantities of the plant. The legislation failed in the Israeli Knesset by a vote of 55 to 52. Israeli lawmakers decriminalized low-level marijuana possession offenses in 2017, subjecting first and second-time offenders to fine-only penalties. The production and prescribed use of medical cannabis has been permitted and, in fact, encouraged among Israeli soldiers suffering with PTSD. In Canada, concerns that legalizing marijuana for those aged 18 and older in Canada would lead to adverse public health consequences have not come to fruition, according to an analysis published in the Journal of the Canadian Academy of Child and Adolescent Psychiatry. The analysis finds that there's been, quote, no marked increase in cannabis youth use, end quote, in the 3-year period following legalization. The authors further highlight the positive societal impact of reducing marijuana-related arrests among adults and young people following the policy change. Regulating marijuana has also led to more targeted public health messaging, the authors suggest. They conclude, quote, in the lead up to legalization, professional associations suggested that legalization posed a threat to public health, advocated for the legal age for cannabis use to be set at a minimum age of 21 or 25, Canada actually has it at 19, or that Canada should not legalize at all because it would place youth at greater risk of harm. With such categorical fears now shown to be largely unfounded, this should provide the basis to move forward on a more nuanced grounds. On the balance, cannabis legalization, especially when considering the severe adverse societal impacts of criminalization, and especially for youth, continues to offer the potential to better protect and achieve consequential net benefits to public health and welfare for cannabis users and society at large, end quote. From a public health standpoint, regulation and education are preferable strategies to decriminalization. Overall, adult use legalization is working largely as voters and politicians envisioned, which is why an increasing number of jurisdictions are shifting their policies in this direction. Separate assessments of Canada's legalization policy have no uptick in the percentage of motor vehicle accidents attributable to marijuana and no changes in either cannabis use or access among higher risk youth. Additional data published in April in the journal Health reports that Canadians are rapidly shifting from the illicit market to the legal market, with an estimated 70% of cannabis consumers in Canada now reporting obtaining the plant from legal sources. Analysis of state-level adult use regulation laws in the United States has similarly failed to find significant upticks in either youth use or access could be attributable to legalization. Other studies have reported no association between legalization laws and any increase in either drug treatment admissions, violent crime, or overdose deaths. This study, Youth Cannabis Use and Legalization in Canada, Reconsidering the Fears, Myths, and Facts 3 years in, appears in this month's edition of the Journal of Canadian Academy of Child and Adolescent Psychiatry. Our last story tonight is from Michigan. A pair of research projects funded by a $20 million tax on marijuana revenue for Michigan's adult use cannabis program will analyze the effects of medical marijuana in military veterans, state officials announced earlier this week. The bulk of the money, nearly $13 million, will examine, quote, the efficacy of marijuana in treating the medical conditions of United States Armed Service veterans and preventing veteran suicide, end quote, according to recipients at the Multidisciplinary Association of Psychedelic Studies, or MAPS. The grant will fund the next step in a study researchers say is the first clinical trial of inhaled botanical marijuana for post-traumatic stress disorder, and only the second to compare the safety and efficacy of cannabis against a placebo. Another $7 million in marijuana-funded revenue grant money was awarded to Wayne State University's Bureau of Community Action and Economic Opportunity, which has partnered with researchers to study how cannabis might be used to treat a variety of mental health disorders, including PTSD, anxiety, sleep disorders, depression, and suicide. Both of these new grants come from Michigan's $20 million Veteran Marijuana Research Grant Program, which was established by Michigan's legalization law approved by voters in 2018. That is the end of our Hemp News segment tonight. If you are a loved one or are looking for a referral to a physician to help obtain medical marijuana anywhere in the United States, then give us a call. You can call us at 503-235-4606. It's 503-235-4606. Now we have a great interview with Roar Mikalsen, author of numerous books on cannabis and human rights. He's out of Oslo, Norway. So stay tuned and remember to help restore hemp. Good night. Hey, I would like to welcome back Roar Mikalsen, who is in Oslo, Norway. And he's been working on cannabis legalization and its tie to human rights for a number of years, including as the author of a number of books that I've had the pleasure of reading a couple and still have a few more to read. Welcome back, Roar.
Thank you, good sir.
Your name in English looks like Roar, but it's pronounced differently in Norwegian. Do you want to just say it just so?
My name in Norwegian is Roar Mikalsen.
Okay, Roar. Yeah,
Yeah.
But it's spelled in English like the word roar, which is a
Yes.
pretty nice word. So
It
you
works
have
out.
a logo behind you for your organization there. Tell us about your organization.
I'm the leader of the Alliance for Rights-Oriented Drug Policies. Our headquarters is in Norway, but our work is international also in scope. We have been in contact with the State Department and the UN and international everywhere. Eventually, we try to raise the human rights issue. So we have been around on the internet email systems, discussing this.
How many books have you written now?
I believe it's 7 books. I don't count some books. That's the first books in Norwegian, but I think it's 7 in English now.
Okay, and tell us about those books, please.
The first one is called Reason Is. It's a book about consciousness research. I have it actually here.
Oh yeah.
So that's the book. And it's about consciousness research.
One.
That's the first one, yes. And the next one is about drug policy. That was the book you showed up, the To End a War book. And then it was this book, To Right or Wrong, about constitutional law and its relationship to drug policy. This book shows how more than 100 constitutional challenges to the drug law in America has been mishandled by the US justice system. It's part 3 is a case study that details this bit. And then after that, it was the Human Rising book, which is an argument for the human rights perspective, showing how moral panic has informed drug policy and how moral panic, this phenomenon, relates to arbitrary persecution and human rights violations.
And you've got a new one coming out?
That was the Billy Goat's Gruff. I recently did also a children's book for adults, so to speak. We just made an audiobook about that. An American guy is reading his background from theater, and we have music, and we are very happy with this. Then you get cosmology and adventure. But basically, this is the human rights. This is the Reason Is book from an easier approach. You know, this Billy Goat's Gruff book, the existential theory bit, explained easy.
The American reader, it's going to be a multimedia on the internet experience. Is that right?
Yes, you have on the YouTube, you can find the Billy Goat's Gruff, The Origin. It's an audiobook for free that with an American that is reading very well.
All right, great.
So we are very happy with the production also. This guy who made the production has been excellent, taking away every ill noise that he found, and he has an ear for these things, you know. And also the music is very nice. So it's a 2-hour different from my other works, but easily accessible self-help and cosmology from the perspective of fairy tales, you know, you can by analogy and
I really admire your focusing on human rights. I think I told you back in 1986, I filed in conjunction with a very political marijuana arrest around what was a vote in Oregon, ballot measure 5 back in 1986. I was involved with, but we filed a constitutional challenge to the drug laws that was about 400 pages. Of course, the courts, I don't know if they even read it. They just dismissed it out of hand back then. But and then I know we were talking earlier, and you're aware of what's been going on with the Mexican government. And then 2 weeks ago, we had Pepe Rivera on our show talking about their Planton 420, where they've been growing marijuana on the federal capital in Mexico City. So it seems like it's an international movement that's kind of come together spontaneously, where, you know, a lot of us don't know what's happening in these other places, but we're doing it ourselves. So
it's interesting, as you say, this constitutional challenge history has been in the 60s and 70s. There were quite a lot of constitutional challenges to the drug law in America. And then and some of them were almost successful, and the one in Alaska was.
Yeah, 2 of them actually. John Sinclair had a constitutional challenge to Michigan's marijuana law. And in 1971, I think it was March 7th, I was just reading this morning, March 7th of 1971, the Michigan Supreme Court struck down Michigan's marijuana laws. But then on April 1st, the Michigan legislature met under an emergency, session, and they recriminalized marijuana on April 1st of 1971, which just happens to be April Fool's Day here in the United States. But then
his case is mentioned in this book, this case study. He's one of the cases I discussed.
And then there was Raven versus Alaska, you mentioned, where they did overturn, and that stood for a long time, the Alaskan marijuana laws until the Reagan administration put through a new initiative to recriminalize it. The guitarist from the Jefferson Airplane, Paul Cantor, he filed a constitutional challenge back in 1968 to the marijuana laws. And he out of the appeals court ruling, they had a minority. He had a couple of dissenting votes, but he lost that case in Hawaii. But it was largely the basis for the Raven case in Alaska.
Hawaii is very interesting because they were very close several times to a majority vote for the legalization of cannabis. It was a very interesting case history over some decades in Hawaii that they were very close several times in Hawaii.
I was stationed in the military in Hawaii, and I've been there many, many times. I've operated clinics on all 4 of the major islands, helping thousands of Hawaiians get their medical marijuana permits. Each island is dramatically different in terms of the culture. For instance, Oahu has 80% of the people, but it only has about 20% of the medical marijuana permits, while the big island of Hawaii has about 70% of the medical marijuana permits. They have a much more cannabis-centric culture there around Hilo and Kona. But there's a large conformist Japanese influence and an organized crime influence throughout the Hawaiian island.
Okay.
I can tell you from firsthand experience. But let's talk about your plan here in the next few weeks. I believe you have a civil disobedience action organized. Would you like to tell our audience about that?
Okay. On September 11th, 1 o'clock, it's a Saturday, we will have a cannabis sale outside the main police station in Oslo to defend the rights of drug law violators and because there has been a drug policy reform attempt in Norway, where there was a royal commission that looked at the history of Norwegian drug policy, and they concluded that moral panic was behind the evolution of Norwegian drug policy. And AROD, or NGO, has shown the connection between this phenomenon of moral panic and the scapegoating and arbitrary persecution and human rights violations. We have documented this relationship in hearings and letters and in over 30 articles in the Norwegian papers, where we explain the state responsibility in times of moral panic towards persecuted groups. And none of these articles were contested with any merit. They just went by in silence. And so now politicians argue again about they will not accept the Commission's findings, firstly, or its recommendations. So, and they are arguing between themselves about what they are supposed to do. They just know that stigmatizing drug users is bad and they have to do something. But because they depend upon demonizing the drug dealer for justifying their policies, they don't know what to do. So there's this blind spot in the Norwegian drug policy that we want to put on stage with this activism. We want to look at, because the political process has failed, there is this separation of powers, and we will use the justice system, just as in Mexico and in several attempts in America's history, where we will try the law from the perspective of the Constitution and see how values and principles like equality, proportionality, autonomy, and the liberty presumption stand against the drug prohibition regime.
Well, that is great. I know they were very successful in Mexico going through the legal system. It was the Mexican Supreme Court ruled 5 times that it violated basic human rights to have cannabis illegal, and that they led to an order that hasn't been followed through yet 2 years later, that the legislature changed the marijuana laws. But there is a entrenched global, what I like to call the drug war, military-industrial complex where the governments and industries are tied together in a fascist manner, actually, to prohibit drugs, and they depend on this money for their livelihood and their existence. And a lot of them are brainwashed into believing that, and a lot of them are corrupt. I would see many times. I went through 2 marijuana arrests, but I've been an expert witness in about 30 different marijuana grow cases, and in all of those cases, the police come in at harvest. They know right the time to come at harvest. When you look in the evidence locker, though, all the flowers are gone. It's just some leaves on stems. But the courts don't want to hear that. They will never, ever, even though I've raised it, not at an attorney's request. I've raised it in my testimony in those cases. Everyone just kind of pretended I didn't say it, So
it's hidden right under the surface, this everybody knows that that organized crime cannot exist without cooperating with government, and the rise of organized crime is intimately involved with the corruption in government. It's like you can have it no other way. And there's so many examples like the Iran-Contra in America, where you had the Clintons and the Bushes involved shipping tons of cocaine to Arkansas, Mena, everything about this story. And there was this movie with Tom Cruise also.
Yeah, perhaps Tom
the life
Cruise
of
has
Barry Seal.
a movie out about it, right? Or he's coming out with a new one, right?
I heard I heard about the movie that it was supposed to be called Mena, but that the Democrats were so furious about this title that they had to change it to what the title ended up with. American, I don't recall, but it was supposed to be called Mena, Arkansas, or something. This title of the movie with Tom Cruise, and the producer, I believe, quit. That at least I saw an interview yesterday with Roger Reeves, the friend of Barry Seal, and that was his story.
I see.
He would also say that Barry Seal had a standing agreement with Bill Clinton, whom he would eat dinners with, for paying $50,000 every time he landed in Mena.
Boy, that's a lot of money.
Yeah.
So, have you made any arrangements for publicity around your September 11th action? And did you choose September 11th because of its import in terms of the global terror war and misinformation?
It is connected to that, and I can explain from many different perspectives. For me, this date is important, but I would say firstly because it is an action of peace, not an action of terrorism, and because of the connotations to the war on terror and how the 9/11 made we're talking about enemy images here, and we want to deflate an exflated enemy image to its proper size. They have taken marijuana and made it its huge enemy of society, just as they had done to terrorism after 9/11. But when you look at both these events, there are many reasons for suspecting foul play within the 9/11 scenario, and that you can see war profiteers have an interest in making humanity become sheep by believing in extended, exaggerated enemy images. So for me personally, my quest has been lasting for 20 years after 9/11, because it took some years before I really got to the bottom of I read a book about 9/11 called Crossing the Rubicon by Mike Rippert, a former cop, which by means of means, motives, and opportunity, like a cop would explain who the culprits behind 9/11 were from his perspective. And there were many things that were hard to refute in this book. So I bought 100 books and delivered it to Norwegian politicians and people in the universities, professors, and newspaper people, but nobody would touch this issue. So for me, that was the way I started out as cannabis activist, because I saw the connection between the war on terror and the war on drugs, and how these enemy images were tools used against humanity to fight our liberties, to take them away and make us thankful for an authoritarian state. So I started out going to the justice system 10 years ago, actually. In 2005, I was caught with a cannabis plantation. And I already did not, I was an activist already, but I was prepared back then to fight both the war on terror and the war on drugs through my right to the fair trial in the Norwegian justice system, and show how these campaigns were violations of human rights and how they represented crimes against humanity. Of course, no judge wanted to give me the chance to explain myself around this situation. So it was 6 rounds in the Norwegian justice system that I tried to defend the human rights of drug law violators, but I went to the European Human Rights Court because I had been denied a voice in my own trial in Norway, and that was a breach of Article 6 in the European Convention. So I had an argument before a judge, but it was a single judge that dismissed the matter and excused himself with the court's competence, But since that, there has been several courts that has looked at this issue and has argued as we would from the perspective of principles. So obviously the European Human Rights Court let 40 million drug users down that day. This was in 2010. And since that, we have been trying to make the European Human Rights Court look at this issue again. And Parliament of Europe, which is connected to the court, has already several times complained or asked that the court look at this issue because they need more directions. But the European Parliament themselves did a base study on human rights and drug policy in 2019, which were very adamant about that there were rights to be remedied here in this situation, and that we had the right to an effective remedy. And states had a responsibility towards the persecuted groups to look at the allegations of serious human rights violations. So we have the paperwork has been done, but the government has still to follow.
I know that earlier this year, the World Health Organization rescheduled cannabis from a Schedule 1 substance with, we call it Schedule 1 here. It's different in different countries, but it required that marijuana be criminalized, and they rescheduled it so it's no longer completely prohibited. And that can make a big difference in the court issue, because right now, here in the United States, judges often say that international treaties carry the same weight as the Constitution itself. And so the fact that the World Health Organization has rescheduled cannabis to where it's now allowed for medicine, where previously it had not been, that this makes a big difference. But it hasn't percolated down, and it'll take years, maybe a decade, for this international treaty change by the World Health Organization in their international their international commission that they meet in Vienna. That they and we had a couple of people on talking about that. Michael Kravitz from Virginia here in the United States, very active in that. But it's an international consortium of activists that help push that through.
Yes, I believe an organization called FAAT, F-A-A-T, has been involved also with this as you know, this bureaucracy, they are hard to move, so they have been fighting a very heroic battle, making small changes, But it was also, they voted, it was like 3 different things they voted on, and while they did some there was a majority vote on one issue or a couple of issues that you were mentioning now. They were also close to going further. It was just like a couple of votes away. So even though they did not go all the way, it was a close call before more openness towards this plant. It's very
I know that China and Russia in particular objected to this rescheduling, and a number of other countries fought against it. But for the first time, the United States put its weight in favor of that change, where it had opposed it up to then. You know, the United States spearheaded all of these international treaties back in the late 50s and early 60s. The Single Convention Treaty of 61 was pretty much our major prohibitionist Harry Anslinger's parting curse upon the future. And the subsequent United Nations treaties on psychotropic substances that, you know, as I said, courts often carry more.
Speaking about the World Health Organization and Anslinger and the regulation of cannabis, firstly, there was a discussion that this cannabis was not properly coming through the regulation back in the 60s because it did not go through the expert group as it was supposed to, but there was a secretary that was close to Anslinger that made this whole deal come true for them. So the way proper procedures were not followed when cannabis was put into the WHO system in the beginning. So people can also look into that and see if that makes the whole, if it's possible to take the system further, you know, because it has a lack of credibility and it has been built on lies all the time.
Exactly. Anslinger pretty much helped criminalize cannabis completely here in the United States based on misinformation. He was married into the Chase family and had a lot of ties to the petrochemical industry, and they pretty much
Mellon family, I believe.
Yeah, I always get the Chase Mellon Bank guy, but yeah, it is the Mellon family, and Mellon in particular was the Secretary of Treasury for Treasury presidents, from Woodrow Wilson all the way up to Hoover. And
major player.
Yeah, he, in addition to being John Rockefeller's partner in a number of major petrochemical companies.
Yes.
So
I bet it was not a coincidence that it was the Rockefeller Foundation that developed methadone and clinics for methadone, you know. And if it had been other people who profited, the methadone surely would not be on the market, you know.
Yeah, it's a horrible choice for another swap your addiction, you know.
Yeah.
So a good friend of mine who was one of my mentors, hippie activist Dana Beal, has been pushing for ibogaine for many, many years for drug addict treatment, but that's another story.
Your picture is breaking up here, so I'm looking at you this way and this way. If I don't know if that's if your producer says it's okay. For me, you are different places on the screen
that
right now.
That might be. He'll tell us if there's a problem. He's
okay.
Keeping a watch on it. So, in your local community, do you have local cannabis activists that you're working with on your action at the Oslo Police Department to sell cannabis, or are you kind of doing it stealth?
This is strictly the AROD, Alliance for Rights-Oriented Drug Policy, that is doing the civil disobedience campaign. But on social media, there has been great interest in this project, and I am also positive about how it has been received so far. There were 2,500 people looking at our website the first day I announced this to the social media. So the response has been fairly well, and also when I talk to people in the media about this, they seem to get it why we are doing it, and seem to understand that this has some sort of legitimacy, that this is a valid endeavor. It starts to make sense also for people who are not used to coming from things from a constitutional perspective, but they start to see that there's something wrong with the political process. They don't listen to reason, and that there are still blind spots in Norwegian drug policy that no one wants to discuss, and that but as the Norwegian police say, they are right in that if we are decriminalizing drug use, we will make it lucrative for organized crime. It is inevitable. We have to regulate unless, and we have to think about how this law of supply and demand is twisted into a dynamic of victim and oppressor, and how we are seeing drug users as some morbid expression. Drug use is a morbid expression of personality. They think, they cannot accept that it is a legitimate use that people can ask for good reasons, and that's why the Mexican Supreme Court decision is very important, I believe, because this is they make a good case that this is something that adults can decide for themselves. We don't need to make people infantile in this matter.
Well, the thing is, there's all this propaganda, we know, that marijuana is bad, but in fact, it's really good. It helps most people's health. It helps people achieve homeostasis, the balance of a lot of different body systems, from the digestive system to the neurosystem to the skeletal system. Cannabis is good for our health. It's not bad, and that's one of the reasons the pharmaceutical industries have been so strongly in favor of what the late great Todd McArea, a doctor in Berkeley who helped legalize medical marijuana, called the mono, well, what is it? It's the mono molecular mercantile madness. That's it, monomolecular mercantile madness. And in terms of what the pharmaceutical industry called, I got to remember exactly how he said it, but that's it. And so he's another one of my mentors out there as well. And but it's a large corporate financial system that has the power that we are battling with our bodies and our minds and our actions.
But constitutional law and human rights, which is two sides of the same coin, it's just about these constitutional principles and putting the drug law to the test of reason. And there's this principle, equality, proportionality, autonomy, the liberty presumption. These are values and principles that we need to readjust policy in accordance with. So, and if the politicians will not do these things, then the courts are an avenue for exploration. And more and more, there is also the case of South Africa, where they have a good Supreme Court case on this issue about right to personality and stuff. And also in Georgia, in a European state, there was also a decision on cannabis that was very favorable in protecting the individual.
I'm not familiar with the nation of Georgia or the.
It is close to Russia. It is close to Russia, so they have a very authoritarian justice system where you get stiff sentences.
Stalin was from Georgia, and the country of Georgia, when he became the head of, he took over after Lenin became ill, but died. But it's nice to hear that there's something happening good in Georgia in terms of human rights and development. And like you said, the decision in Mexico needs to be emulated around the world. It's the same arguments you've made in your books that the Supreme Court of Mexico basically came forward with in their decisions.
And so this is what everyone who is looking at this from the perspective of principles will conclude that the drug law does not conform with the demands of law. So we just need more courts to look at this issue, and the human rights analysis and the and the strict scrutiny in America. All across the world, citizens have an avenue where they can try to defend some ground on this concept. And this is the best way to do it internationally also, because you can see that Canada and America, different places are regulating drugs now, and prohibitionist countries are claiming that this is a violation of obligations to the UN Drug Control Conventions. So the human rights argument is being used from both sides now. Prohibitionists think that legalizing and regulating drugs is violating the human rights of children and stuff, and we can argue the other way, that regulating these substances is the way we better protect children and leave society unharmed from the economy that is and the crime and everything. So I think Canada and other countries are starting to rely on human rights to defend their own status in terms of the prohibitionist system. And this is like the way this is the way the water runs, and it will, the dams will break, but we will see if it takes 2 years or 5 years or 10 years. We don't know. People have been hoping for this since the 60s.
Yeah,
you know?
yeah. I've been working on it my entire adult life. A week after my 18th birthday, I went to a marijuana protest, the White House smoke-in in Washington, D.C. So I've been at it quite a while too. But I was just a child in the 60s, so I wasn't active quite then. But you know,
It's a slow and painful road, this activism.
It's true. When I first got involved, I really thought in the 70s, I really thought that marijuana would be legal by the early 1980s. And I think that was a general consensus as states in the United States began to decriminalize marijuana. But with the election of Ronald Reagan and their war on drugs and Just Say No campaigns, they turned it back, and I had no idea that 40 plus years later I'm still. But we have made some progress, fortunately, and because of that, there were a lot of arguments. I was a spokesperson on our campaign to legalize marijuana here in Oregon in 2012, ballot measure 80, and debated prosecutors and sheriffs, and they would argue those arguments you mentioned, that we've got to protect children and the unborn and those kind of things. And we always argued the best way to do it was through regulation. Well, now that's taken place here in a dozen different states across the United States. And the studies show that we were right, that less children are using drugs, less children are definitely selling drugs, and that less kids are even interested in it because it's normalized. Where I'm sitting right now, there's probably a dozen different marijuana stores within the surrounding kilometer from where I'm sitting, or half mile. And it's creating jobs and community, and the kids in the schools don't even notice it.
That's the way there's been in Holland also for 40 years. People, it's not a problem in Holland, and that's why they have not regulated, because society get by with not looking at this issue and just looking the other way, as the Dutch police does. But there's still organized crime in Holland that makes this a very big problem. So it's not a solution; it's just ignoring the problem, really.
And a right-wing government came into power in the Netherlands, and they closed more than half of the cannabis shops around Holland. And so that's the thing, the swing of governments and back and forth between more law enforcement, more liberty continues to happen. It's a slow cycle, but right now it seems we're moving toward the more liberty perspective. But I've seen it end before as well, back in the 70s, where a lot of things were being liberalized, and then there was a backlash from the moneyed interests, pretty much. So after your event on September 11th, you think the police will arrest you?
That is their job, and I suspect they will take me into the station and do something to process the case. That's what I want. I just want them to make everything calm and peaceful. We don't want a stressful situation. It seems to me also that there will be maybe more than 100 people attending from the Norwegian society that knows about this and who are looking forward to this event with some expectation as to what is going to happen. We already have announced in letters to the police that we are doing this event, and we have asked for their cooperation. They have not responded, so we will see.
Yeah.
But then again, we have also said to them that the Norwegian Director of Public Prosecutions has, based on the same principles as Arod is defending, has stuck with the drug reform report of the Royal Commission and voted for decriminalization against many others in the police. So there are new people in the police now that see that the old way is not working. And we have the law enforcement against prohibition also in Norway that are talking about arbitrary law and defending arbitrary persecution. So this is also something for the police to pick up on, and nobody is served with laws that make everyone miserable and the society worse. So this is also in the interest for the police. So we have a common interest in looking at how the drug law situation and the human rights situation is in Norway.
I am not very familiar, as you're not surprised to know, I'm not really familiar with the political and government system in Norway. So you must have lawyers. Do you have any lawyer who's going to help you, or you obviously have these arguments figured out yourself? Can you defend yourself in the Norwegian courts, or what can you say about that?
I'm looking for a lawyer as we speak. I have been in contact with a couple of them on the internet, but it seems we have yet to find a lawyer that is willing to take this case. It's funny, people are more scared to take this case than the Breivik case, you know?
Yeah.
We will see who takes it.
Where lawyers might not want to be too involved beforehand, they might be accused of somehow violating their job requirements, the court's requirements. But what we've seen many times, it seems that lawyers who came forward in the United States sometimes were tied to the intelligence agencies, and they weren't always working on behalf of their clients.
There is also that issue that you never know about your lawyer. And I have had 6 rounds in the justice system before when we tried to defend the human rights. And I was very disappointed about the community of lawyers and how they ignored these problems in law and just went about their day making their payment. They did not really care about the justice of the law. They just wanted to get their day over with, So
yeah, finding a good activist lawyer is difficult, and they obviously spend a lot of money to become lawyers, and most of them, it seems, are more interested in the money than justice itself.
But we will get by no matter what. We will find a way throughout this justice system with a public lawyer or a lawyer we find ourselves. We don't know. I've done this myself to the European Court of Human Rights before on my own. So I know I can do this road myself if that is the way it has to be. But we're hopeful for finding a lawyer.
I think you might agree that you have a much greater mastery of these laws and history and legal concepts than lawyers do. They don't teach lawyers how to be activists in their education. They teach them how to be conformists. So
absolutely,
a lot of times you can't get a lawyer to do what you want them to do. because it's not in favor of that. So do you have any other plans in terms of once you've achieved your goal and you're arrested and you're in the court system, and how do you have any idea of the
Yes, we already have prepared the police for the events of that day, and they know that we have a procedural claim that we will take to court to argue in defense of liberty for drug law violators, which is these two books here. So this first one explains how moral panic connects to scapegoating and human rights violations. And so this is a full argument that shows how power conscious. Yeah, this is a full argument for the legalization, the regulation of drugs, and for the persecuted groups, this is what we need. And if we have lawyers in the system that defends the tradition of arbitrary law and denies human rights, even a platform in the justice system, we have this book that makes them that dispositions their
you
position,
can
so to
educate
speak.
them very quickly if they read.
It's very easy, and we have also very good reviews on both books, 5-star reviews on both books. That is very nice. So it is a problem for them.
Right. Well, we're about running out of time. Is there if our viewers are interested in contacting you or supporting your work or helping in any way, what's the best way for them to do that?
They can contact me at Alliance for Rights-Oriented Drug Policies, arodpolicies.org, or they can contact me at lifelibertybooks.com. Both places work. We are both organizations involved with this project.
All right. Well, we'll superimpose those addresses. I know Bill will in his time here. So is there anything you'd like to say in closing?
No, I would just say thank you for having me on your show again. It's been great being on.
Well, I appreciate you coming back on again. When I heard about your actions, I knew we had to do another show. So
we can follow this further down the road, and we will see how events has proceeded after 9/11, and we can see where we go from there.
Get you back
what will happen is that we want the political process to be examined, and then we want an independent, impartial, and competent tribunal to look at how the constitutional values relates to drug prohibition. This is what politicians has been trying to avoid all this time, and this is what we want. If after that, the natural result will be a truth and reconciliation committee.
Well, we certainly look forward to having something like that here. I'd love to see that happen on a global scale. Well, thank you.
Activists around the world should see that this is an avenue for exploration.
We have had Roar Mikalsen in Oslo, Norway, at lifelibertybooks.com. Here is our guest tonight, and I want to thank you for coming on, Roar, and good luck with everything.
Thank you again, Paul. It's been great.
For our viewers out there, keep working to restore hemp. Good night, and just liberty for all.
Take care, Paul. Take care.